Let's talk about test-driven development, or TDD for short. What exactly is the deal with TDD, why is everybody praising it, and why would it ever be useful to anybody trying to learn how to code? So, TDD in principle is kind of reversing the process of writing code as you may know it. In the previous example, what we have done is we have created first the recipe app, and then we have written out the tests, right? So the order was, first we wrote some production code in the recipe app class, and then we wrote the tests. However, test-driven development, as the name would suggest, is pretty different from what we have seen right now. Test-driven development is actually reversing this process, and first you create the class with the method that you want to test out and the one that you want to implement. But key difference here is that we will not be writing out any code, we will just write some dummy values in here, and first we'll create some tests and think through what exactly do we want to happen in different cases, right? So what happens if I enter a null, what happens if I enter anything else? So in this case, what I have created is a word counter. If you have been checking out my videos, then you know when we're talking about collections, this has been also one of the exercises there. So you should be pretty familiar with this one. But if not, then go ahead, go back to those videos and check there whether you can first do it by yourself. But going back to the point is, I've created a method in here that will return a hash map of string as a key and integer as a value that will essentially be a word and then the number of occurrences of said word within a text that is given as an input. So what I need to do is I need to create a dummy value that will be returned, in this case an empty hash map, so that everything compiles nicely. But now what I will do is that I will create tests first to think through what I want to happen in some cases and then go ahead with the implementation. This way I will know what to watch out for, I will know what to test for, and how the code will really look like. So let's just start by creating a new test class called wordCounterTest, and let's create a test object. Private wordCounter test object new word counter. Okay, with that out of the way, let's create our first test method, and let's go for a happy path. Public void, just call it happy path, and happy path means that everything is behaving as it should be, right? So we are testing what would happen if there is a proper input. So if my method here is supposed to be counting words within a text, then I suspect if I enter a text, John has a cat, then I would get 4 words with a count of 1 that I would then need to compare. So let's just create the first hash map that I will be comparing against. So let's create new hash map, string integer, not ingredient but integer, expected equals new hash map. Now that I've got it, let's put in here expected put John 1 and add up the rest of the words. Okay, so I'm expecting to get John has a cat if I put in here the text John has a cat, exactly that, into my test object. So what I will need is an assertions, assert equals, and here I put expected I have just created, and then test object that count words in a text. John has a cat. So that's my first test, and essentially this is a happy path, and as we can see, John has a cat, each word happens only once, and then it should input everything nicely. Let's write out another test. Public void, let's check for nulls, null text, and let's see what I would want to happen if there is a null as an input. Realistically speaking, I don't really like nulls. They are very tricky to work with. So what I would suggest is to put in an empty hash map whenever we detect that there is a null as an input. So what I'm going to expect is that my test object, whenever I count words with it and I input there a value of null, then I should be getting an empty hash map. So in order to achieve that, let's put a new hash map and test object that counts words in a text and put null. Another thing that I would need to test out is, let's say I'm putting in a word John in capital letter and word John in a lowercase letter, starting with lowercase. So I would say that those are the same word and I would like for them to be counted as such, right? So this is another thing that I can test out. Let's check public void. Let's see if lowercase and uppercase are the same. And what that would mean is, let me just copy and paste this hash map so that I don't have to write out everything. If I put John in starting uppercase and John in lowercase, then it would mean that for my map, let's analyze it for a second. If I put John, no, sorry, that's good. What I need to do is I want for everything to be in the same case, meaning that if I put everything here with that, then it would mean that I would be getting John lowercase with a 2. So this also changes things here because I can't really put John with upper letter. So we have determined that everything will be lowercase to normalize everything, so to speak, so that everything is in the same case, so that we do not differentiate, and John with uppercase is not different than John from lowercase. So as you can see, we have even something at the beginning of the tests. So let's just copy and paste in this one, and let's just put John and John. So that's another thing for us to consider. So we know how to behave in case of a null, we know how to behave in case of a lowercase uppercase, we know how to behave in case of a happy path. Let's also add another case that we need to be wary of, namely what happens if there is an empty string input in there. So let's test for empty string. What I would expect, if there is nothing in my hash map, rather in my text, and it's empty, then I can just return an empty hash map, right? Because yeah, it makes sense. So essentially the same as we would for a null. So let's also put it as such. So yeah, that is also something that we can take care of. So right now, as you can see, even though I haven't really written any code, I pretty much know what do I need to do to address some of the issues, right? I needed to think through what will happen if I write out John in capital letter, in small letter, or anything of sorts. I would need to think what happens with null, with empty string, etc, etc. Of course, there are many other cases that I can consider. For example, what happens if there is an alphabet that is not supported, what happens if I put in special characters, etc, etc. But just for the sake of simplicity and showcasing you how to actually use test-driven development, how to really think that way, and how to develop the code as such. With that being said, now that I have my tests, let's just try and run it. And yeah, two tests are failing. My happy path, my lowercase and uppercase are the same, but tests for empty string and null test are actually working. And why is that? Because they are always returning an empty map. But of course, in our word counter, we are always returning an empty map. So it makes sense that they pass. Most important thing is that first we thought about the tests and what would happen. So now, according to test-driven development, I have created an empty method with a proper return statement. I have created some tests that will check what is happening in some edge cases and in a happy path. And what I need to do right now is write out the code itself. So the code is pretty simple and straightforward. First of all, what we need to do is we get a text. What we want to do is go through this text, through each and every word in this text, and count the occurrences of our words. So first thing that we need to do is transform our text into some sort of an array that will be much easier for us to traverse through than just going through the text itself. So in order to achieve that, there is a very handy method in the string class that is called split. So right now I'm going to create an array of strings that I'm going to call words, and it is going to be created by using split method. And the sign that I want to split is going to be the space sign, so an empty space. Of course, there are other empty spaces such as new line sign, the tab sign, so there's quite a lot of them, but I want to just do the space for the sake of this testing. If you want to go deeper into the testing, then of course, within this word counter test, what you can do is add some empty lines, empty text, some really nice cases that you can detect. For example, what happens in case of an exclamation mark, question mark, dot, ampersand, all those special characters, and you need to handle those. I won't be doing it within this particular test and showcase, but trust me, if you want to, this is also very good experience for you to get as to how to really think about what can happen. Because right now I'm being pretty naive about the input that I'm getting. I'm always assuming that first of all, there is going to be spaces between those words. And then second of all, what I'm assuming is that in my text, I won't get any special characters. So that's two assumptions that I'm making for the sake of simplicity. Now, also one another thing that I can already handle. I know that I have tests for my null and for empty list. So in order to always use the fact that we will be getting empty list, we can check it early, before we do all those operations, right? Before we split the text. Because if we were to split the text on a null, then of course it would fail, we would get a null pointer exception. But we can fix that by doing so-called early return, meaning that if we detect that something is wrong, then what we will do is that we will end the program and essentially no harm will be done. So if text is equal to null or text that is empty, what we can do is just return an empty hash map. So now we know that starting from line 9 forward, the text is not null and the text is not empty. So what I can do right now is create the hash map that I will of course be using for the sake of returning it later. We are going to call it words to count equals new hash map to just signify the relation between the key and the value. So words is the key, and string and count is measured in integers. And that's the value that we're going to be returning. So words to count. Nice. What I can do right now is, of course, we've been talking about inputting here an array of words. That's all nice and fun, but what we are missing right now is one of the tests that we have here, right? The lowercase and uppercase. If we were to do it this way, I would then need to lowercase all the words that I get in this array. But I'm a bit lazy, I don't want to do it, so I can just use text that to lowercase. And here we do a reassignment. Okay, so now we've got all the text in lowercase, and now we've got an array of words. So now that I've got this array, what I need to do is traverse through it, and if I know that I have a specific word in my map, then I need to increase the counter. And if not, then I just need to put it with a count of 1. So what we're going to need is first a loop. So let's use for string word within words. And what we want to do is, once again, if the word already exists, so if our words to count that contains key, because we are counting keys here and the words are the keys, then words to count that put word and afterwards what we want to do is words to count that get word plus 1. So what I'm doing right here is just rewriting the value with another, with it increased by 1. And else, if the word is not there, what we want to do is words to count that put word and initial value of 1. Of course, I can do it prettier with the usage of the methods in Words account and then using a lambda within it. But for the sake of simplicity and readability, actually, I'm going to do it this way. So right now I have written out the code, and let's check if this code really fills in all the requirements. As you can see, it really does. So to sum it up, we have done test-driven development of the word counter method. What was it meant to do is to count the words, and with each word that is put in there, I wanted to know how many occurrences of this word are within the text. So in order to test that, first I have created a method that is dummy method with dummy value that is returned, and then tests for the happy path, for some edge cases with null text and test for empty string, and then lowercase and uppercase are the same. Of course, there are other things to do here, but still, this is a good showcase of how to use test-driven development. It's a very powerful method for you if you are trying to learn and understand a little bit more within your methods, or when you catch yourself too much into the fact that you can't really test out your code, because you first need to think about tests. So to reiterate, first, you create a dummy method with good return value, meaning of the same type. Then you create the tests. You think how it can break, what can be the input, what can happen, what can be the exceptions, and how can you actually improve upon it. Then you write out the production code, and then you go ahead and test out the code with the things that you have already written and check whether everything is behaving properly. So yeah, with that being said, the next time we'll be talking about tests will be about integration tests in the near future. But for the time being, thank you very much for watching and see you in the next videos.